All eyes are on Olympic boxing today as another boxer who has previously failed a gender eligibility test won her first match in the women's 57-kilogram category. Taiwan's Lin Yuting, a two-time world champion, faced off against Uzbekistan's Sitora Turdibekova, who was in tears after their loss. At the World Championships last year, Yuting failed the International Boxing Association's gender eligibility test. Yesterday, the internet blew up after Algerian fighter Imane Khelif won her match against Italy's Carini, who quit just 46 seconds into their fight. But the International Olympic Committee has repeatedly defended the two boxers' right to compete. And after the controversy erupted yesterday, the IOC released a statement, quote, saying, "We have seen in reports misleading information about two female athletes competing at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. The two athletes have been competing in international boxing competitions for many years in the women's category. These two athletes were the victims of a sudden and arbitrary decision by the IBA. Towards the end of the IBA World Championships in 2023, they were suddenly disqualified without any due process."
But that has not stopped some of the Twitterverse from reacting. Author J.K. Rowling wrote on X, quote, "Could any picture sum up our new men's rights movement better? The smirk of a male who knows he's protected by a misogynist sporting establishment, enjoying the distress of a woman he's just punched in the head, and whose life's ambition he's just shattered." Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, wrote, quote, "This is where Kamala Harris's ideas about gender lead, to a grown man pummeling a woman in a boxing match." To which journalist Aaron Rupar wrote, quote, "We're talking about a woman boxer from a country where it's illegal to be trans boxing an Italian in France, and we're blaming U.S. VP Kamala Harris. Sounds legit." So, point taken that obviously Kamala Harris is not on the IOC. She did not come up with these rules. She does support men playing in women's sports, which I think is what J.D. Vance was getting at there. But there's been a lot of misreporting, I think, on these specific boxers who are competing. What the IRA said when they were disqualified is not just that they had elevated testosterone levels, but that they also had XY chromosomes. So the suggestion is that they had some kind of rare disorder, like we would typically describe it as intersex, where they have the male chromosomes, they have the male levels of testosterone, but they haven't fully developed their primary and secondary sex characteristics. And so to me, this is a clear-cut case of unfairness. I mean, even just watching this matchup between the boxers yesterday, the one from Algeria who was accused of failing a prior gender test, this woman who bowed out of the fight after 46 seconds said, "I've never felt a punch as hard as that." And that's the fundamental problem with having men and women's sports, is that it's not just unfairness, but it's also a safety issue. We're talking about a category level advantage that men have over women, whereas typically within the categories of sex, we see comparative advantages like so-and-so is a little bit taller, so-and-so has better resources to access training. But there's a reason why Katie Ledecky, despite having the 20 fastest times ever in the 1,500-meter freestyle, is still a full minute slower than the men's record in that same event.
I mean, listen, I think this is a complicated story. Let's just start off with that there's too many different reports. There was no evidence provided, so much so that the Olympics Committee has come out and said that as well. Having chromosome conversations, intersex conversations, obviously there are very unique situations here. That is why they have these committees and they take them case by case. I think what is unfair about this situation is how the internet is, and J.D. Vance in particular, is using it as an opportunity for his election, his electoral campaign, at the risk of these boxers. All of the boxers are now at risk. All of them are dealing with hatred online, especially the ones that are in question here about their identity. The amount of bullying online on top of it is putting all trans people at risk. Every single time a situation like this pops up and a right-winger wants to use it to their electoral advantage in this specific situation, it puts trans kids' lives at risk. It's not just that this is a conversation about fairness in sports. It's that it's now become a conversation about bullying a group of people who are already at increased violence, sexual violence risk, and using it as an opportunity to isolate a group of people and reduce their quality of life. I think this is an internet debate. It is not necessarily a real debate that is happening internally in the Olympics community. Maybe they're having it on the commissions, but that is why you have those commissions, to take them case by case, to look at the evidence, what evidence is real, what evidence is not, what reporting is real, what reporting is not. And they even addressed that in their statement, that there's a lot of misreporting out there and the internet has taken this by storm. But again, it's putting folks at risk. And we have to keep in mind the safety of the trans community when we have these conversations.
Well, it's interesting to me that we often go to this reflexive response about, well, people are bullying trans people because they don't want them to participate in women's sports and their lives are in danger because of this. I'd love to see the evidence for that. But why are we elevating the feelings of the trans community over the women whose ability to compete in a fair competition has been stripped from them, whose, in many cases, opportunities have been taken away? We've seen women who have trained their entire lives in the sport of swimming. It's a perfect example in the case of Leah Thomas, because they were one rung off of the podium because a man competed in a women's sport. All of their training went to waste when they should have been in the state championship or the national championship, and they lost that opportunity because they were competing against someone who they never really had a chance to defeat.
Well, I mean, the question is whether or not you see a trans person as a woman or a man. I mean, and I think fundamentally what you're describing here is you do not see a trans person where they chose their identity, gone through gender in a situation, gone through major changes in their lives to put them on this stage in the women's category. I think this conversation is getting so exhausting because it is fundamentally just about whether or not a trans person can be seen as a woman if they identify as a woman. And that, I think, is what is being reduced in this conversation. And by saying that a woman, cannot compete with a trans person is also denying a woman her ability to be able to compete and her choices in life. I mean, I find this it's a reductionist conversation. And we're not thinking about the complexities of what's going on in these unique situations, and we're not thinking about the livelihoods of the people who are being profiled in these situations.
You're right. I do not believe that someone who takes hormones or gets sex reassignment surgery becomes a woman. That's bar none. And even if you do believe that this person is a woman because they say that they are, because they underwent some experimental medical treatment, the reality is they retain a physical advantage against women. If you go through puberty with male testosterone in your body, you have longer wingspan, you have greater lung capacity, you have greater agility, better cardiovascular ability, you have better stamina, you have greater bone density. I mean, all of these things matter in sports.
Testosterone goes down. Can you not deny that?
That does, okay, first of all, the testosterone does not go down below a level that's higher than the average woman, for one. And two, those things like bone density, the ability to have greater muscle mass, those don't go down just because you have a lower level of testosterone in your body. Those are irreversible parts of going through puberty as a man.
But in this situation, the boxing controversy that we're talking about, there is no evidence of that. There is no evidence that they have stated that any of these boxers were biologically men.
And unfortunately, we won't know because the IRA says that they actually ran a test and determined that both of these boxers had XY chromosomes, but the IOC doesn't do that. The
IOC did not acknowledge. The IOC said that the IRA did not have substantial evidence, and also the IOC,
But the IOC fundamentally has a process in which they don't actually look at those things. So I don't even know that they would be able to look at the evidence based on their non-discrimination statement because they changed the way that they identify people's gender for the purposes of competition back in 2021, and they explicitly say on their website that they don't look at testosterone levels anymore. They don't look at genitalia. They don't look at chromosomes. They've legally barred themselves from looking at all of those factors, and they go strictly, for the most part, based on identity and history of competition. So they don't even have a full accounting of the physical advantages that a competitor might have against someone else in the female category.
Well, what if in this situation, as I believe one of the tweets Aaron Ripar stated, you come from a country where it is not safe for you to identify as a trans athlete or as a woman, and it's based on that country's own reporting that they're receiving to the IRA.
What does that have to do with the XY chromosomes, though?
Well, why is XY
trans, right?
But why is XY chromosome the thing that determines whether or not you're trans?
It doesn't. The XY chromosomes determine whether or not you're male, not whether or not you're trans.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, why is that the determining factor?
Because the problem is
because if you're middle sex, it doesn't necessarily mean. But there's a full spectrum here, is what I'm trying to say.
But this is a common sort of thing that I hear from pro-trans activists, which is that because intersex exists, that means that there's not a gender binary, that male and female don't exist. But the reality with intersex is that the complication comes not from the fact that this person's not a man, but just that they don't develop the primary sex characteristics properly. It's a genetic malfunction that happens with. their genitalia, not with their testosterone levels or the fact
I understand,
that
but what does that have to do
testes.
with competing in sports? What does that have to do? What does being intersex or trans have to do with competing in sports against women?
It's not about being trans or intersex. It's about being a man competing in women's sports.
But if you're intersex, which is based on the XY
you have male
chromosomes you're having.
Yeah, you have male chromosomes. You are a man who has a genital dysfunction.
I don't think that somebody who's intersex sees themselves that way. I don't even think doctors
I don't care
see
how
them
they
that way.
see themselves. I really don't.
But why is it up to you to decide and not up to, say,
it's not up to
the
me. It's up to
community that-
biology.
Why is it not up to the commission who's setting these rules, who's having these extensive debates, and when the IOC says, we do not acknowledge that,
right, the IOC is allowed to do that, and we're allowed to criticize them and say that they are contributing to an unfair competitive environment.
but why is it that somebody online who doesn't have the same access to information suddenly knows more, J.D. Vance in this situation, and is now putting the trans community at risk, the greater trans
How is he
community
putting them at risk by
Because he's
criticizing?
jumping to conclusions based on information that we don't have, based on his speculation and ginning up his base so he can win an election, raise money.
Do you think that the women who are competing in sports against men are at risk due to issues of safety?
I don't think women are competing against men in sports.
Because trans women are women?
Yes.
Okay. We obviously have a fundamental,
I think that's
insurmountable
basically it.
conflict here, I think. All right, we're going to leave it there. That's actually going to do it for us this week on Rising. Great, fun topic to end on, but it was great being with you.
It was really
Naomi.
fun.
Really
Thanks.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much.
All right, that's going to do it. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Have a great weekend.